Oh, there we go.
Oh man, we just said a bunch of nothing for no.
We've been talking and talking about repairs and stuff, and I didn't even have my audio on.
Guess we'll have to
Look at
start from
that.
the top.
Yeah, I guess. David, can you hear us now? Thank you so much for letting us know.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so we were just talking about repairs regarding heat and things like that. Because what we're going to be doing to this Martin D35, it's a Martin 12 D35, is there's a bit of damage to the pick guard, which is a very classic thing to happen with Martins. The pick guard material that they used for a long time. Perfect. Thank you so much, David. Yeah. So the pickguard material that they used for a long time was a particular material that just shrinks easily. It off gases and it shrinks, and it shrinks at a different rate than the wood does. And so what winds up happening is it either separates from the wood, which is actually kind of the more ideal situation, or it stays adhered to the wood but shrinks and then causes cracking. And so it's a classic. It literally, we call it in the industry the classic Martin pickguard crack, and oftentimes it goes down all the way to the bridge, and underneath the bridge, and sometimes even continues all the way down to the lower bout of the guitar. So in this case, it more separated from the instrument a little bit. There is a little bit of a crack underneath, which we didn't notice during the initial evaluation of this guitar. So we're contacting the customer right now to check and see whether or not he would like us to address that. But either way, we're going to go ahead and take the pick guard off of this thing. That pick guard now could be reflattened out, but realistically, it's still going to have these shrinking issues over the years. It's a better idea to go ahead and put a more modern material on there that's not going to shrink quite so much, and we'll get a better adhesion to it using a better glue that's not going to shrink and or going to be expanding and shrinking more at a similar rate to the wood. So that's the plan with this thing. We were talking about removing that, and what that looks like is basically we're going to use Mike's going to be using a heat gun to remove that. And one of the things we're talking about is just being careful about how much heat you apply, and that glue really doesn't take a whole lot of heat to melt. It starts melting at about 130 degrees Fahrenheit, and that kind of got us into talking about how essentially 130 degrees is very easily achievable if a guitar is in its case in a car in the sun. It's going to get well above that, and it's something that we deal with quite a lot in the repair world. Is right after somebody has moved, people think that moving from one climate to another, a lot of the repairs that are associated with that are humidity related, and that certainly can be a thing that happens. But heat is actually a much faster and more violent killer of guitars, because it can really wreak havoc very, very quickly. Here, it's a catch-22 situation. Leaving the guitar in the case is the best way to look after it and maintain constant humidity / heat. That's true. But leaving it in the case means you don't play it as much. Yeah, slap on some plastic. No one will ever know. So, I mean, we certainly could flatten that thing out by heating it or soaking it in like almost boiling water, basically. And then you can slap it between two flat boards. And what do you know, all of a sudden you have a flat pickguard again. But like I was saying, that pickguard material is causing a problem for a reason. It's shrinking at a faster rate than the wood. So it makes sense to just replace this rather than go ahead and fix that and re-glue it, and then 5-10 years down the line he's going to have the same problem again. So,
and this one was originally glued to the wood, which is a part of the problem.
Right.
So the customer wanted a new one. He opted because we talked about that.
Right.
But so in this case, it actually has the adhesive film, and we're going to be using that, and we're actually going to probably apply a thin barrier finish here first before I put it down.
That's an excellent idea. it helps create like a little bit of a barrier between the wood itself and the actual plastic material, because then again, these are going to shrink and expand at different rates, and so if there's like a float level between the two, it means that less damage will come to the guitar if the plastic becomes an issue down the road too. And yeah, you're right. Leaving it in the case means you don't play it as much, but there are ways of dealing with that. I 100%. So like here in the shop, we have both humidity and temperature control going on, and humidity is one of these topics I could talk for hours and hours and hours about, literally, because it's so important to guitars and the environment that they're kept in. We have all of our instruments hanging out on hooks and things like that, and of course, like I totally get it. You want to do that at home because they're pretty. They're some of your most treasured items. But realistically, if you are not willing to put in a whole home humidification system, or if you have them all in a room, having that room fully humidified, it is not a good idea to have them hanging out on your walls. Or at very least, factor in the fact that you are going to have much higher expenses at places like us, because you will have a lot more repair needs if you are leaving your instruments out on the wall and you are not addressing the humidity in the room. Guitars like to live at about 40-50% relative humidity, and if you are doing anything less than that, you are going to be having problems with humidity, and it's all just a matter of time. So highly recommend that you address your humidity in some way, shape, or form. It is a heck of a lot easier and a lot less maintenance to have your humidity in the smallest container possible, basically, for your instrument, which is its case. A hard shell case works way better than a gig bag in this regard, because a gig bag breathes. So if you have humidification in a gig bag, some of that moisture is immediately getting lost by dissipating out into the open air. It happens much less with a hard shell case. So we do recommend hard shell cases whenever possible. And the next best option is to humidify your home, but that requires a heck of a lot of upkeep, especially in the kind of arid climates where I come from in Tucson, Arizona. Having whole home humidification, you would be filling up a 5-gallon whole home humidifier probably 3 times a day, depending on the size of your home.
You better run a float valve with a water main.
Right, exactly. In fact, at one point in time, I did have that exact kind of rig setup where it was just a constant trickle basically into the humidifier, because it gets eaten up so fast in the air down there. I feel like the way a modern acoustic is built doesn't make it very repair friendly. It depends. I think.
Yeah, it depends.
It depends on the maker, the manufacturer.
Well, my favorite.
You mean
Taylor?
Taylor.
That's
Taylor's very easy to work on.
Yeah. And the neck reset is like, you can throw that in with the setup instead of, it's going to be $650, because it takes all of 10, 15 minutes,
Right. There's a lot of advancements that have come down the line. Especially with acoustics in recent years, in the last 2 decades, I would say.
Yeah.
That have made working on acoustic instruments actually significantly easier and significantly better. Wish guitar makers would take more inspiration from violin makers, where the whole thing can be disassembled and they can last hundreds of years.
True.
Yeah, honestly, so I would say like manufacturers like Martin, for example, the ones that have been around for a long time and have been more or less keeping to these kind of traditional methods. I would say that if anything, I think the older instruments are maybe a little bit more difficult to work on.
Especially if you don't, mystery glue, I suppose.
Yeah, that's the thing is that it's not even necessarily that it's more difficult, I guess. It's just that it's a different animal, and like you kind of know it may be more time consuming.
Right.
You have to be a little bit more careful. There's reasons for that. That's one having to do with the materials themselves that are being used. but it also has to do with, usually older instruments have an economic aspect to them that you really need to be very mindful of as you work on them.
Well, because
not that we're not going to be careful on anything and everything that we work on, but it is something that you have to be especially mindful of with a guitar of high value or of a particular age, certainly.
Well, you could carefully with the right jig, you could route the bind if you needed to replace the top. You could route the binding off and get in there with a knife and separate this top pretty cleanly if you pay attention and take your time, But it's not as it's definitely more work than a violin. Since violin are made to come apart. Even though I don't really work on them, that's not our wheelhouse. It is definitely made to do that, whereas guitars really aren't.
That's true. Yeah, guitars are definitely when we've made guitars also. I mean, there are certain parts of it that you put together hoping that they never have to come back apart again.
Right.
You don't want the box of a guitar to ever need to be reopened or readjusted. And
True.
that has to do with you're trying to create a solid environment. You're trying to create something that's rigid. But things like a neck joint. Having a dovetail is an extremely strong joint, and there's advantages certainly. I think a dovetail joint in a neck basically is creating. I think the biggest advantage has to do with like tone transfer and the fact that you have got a really solid connection between the neck and the body means that any sort of tonal qualities that might be transferred from the strings into the neck can also then transfer from the neck into the body, and it gives extra kind of flavor to the overall sound of the instrument. And the more solid of a joint that you have there, the better that transfer is going to be. That said, I think the dovetail joint was the best way to do that for a long, long time.
Right.
Nowadays, especially with a manufacturer like Taylor, where they're doing things, pretty much everything that they do is with automated CNC process, where they're dealing with a computer is essentially measuring things down to like the micron level. They're able to get a very, very solid connection there, and so having a bolt hold it in place is perfectly adequate.
There's no gap.
There's no gap. There is perfectly good connection between the wood of the body and the wood of the neck. And so the ability to remove that neck and make the instrument workable to someone like us is a huge advantage, I think. And it to me as somebody who works on instruments, I would say that's a major selling point to something like a Taylor. It means that there's more likely that I'm going to have a longer or more longevity out of that instrument, because work is inevitable. Repairs are inevitable on any instrument. So the easier it is to get in there and fix the things that are common problems is just smart engineering. It's really what it comes down to. Yeah, so what Mike brought out here, I'll go ahead and switch over to our close-up cam so you can see.
Close up.
These are the Taylor neck shims, and they come in all sorts of different sizes. Basically, so this is what they look like. It's hard to tell because they're so small, but essentially they're tapered. So they're thinner on this side than they are on this side. And this allows you to basically take the neck off, and then this slips underneath the tongue of the fingerboard. Or actually, this is the heel of the neck. So this goes on the back side of there, and then this one slips under the tongue. Something like that, essentially, which allows you to adjust the angle of the neck on this face and then the angle of the neck on this face, so that you get really just perfect, a connection between the wood surfaces.
And you can change the fingerboard shim if there's a hump or something, which you don't normally have, but you can take a hump out.
Right, exactly, yeah. Which is just absolutely invaluable, like being able to work an instrument that way. Taylor has a very fancy way of dealing with this, in that they have their own shims and stuff. This is something that can be fashioned for any bolt-on instrument, though. We could certainly make these with relative ease, but Taylor likes to have everything all original, everything Taylor, and this is what they do. And we, as a Taylor certified repair center, have access to these kind of things. So yeah. Yeah, Taylor neck resets just simply are a lot easier. I mean, that's the reality of it. We can do a neck reset on a Taylor in a matter of 20 to 30 minutes tops.
It takes more time for me to take the sticker off than to take the neck off, change the shims, and put it back on. Especially when that sticker doesn't want to peel.
Right? Yeah. Just trying to get the angle on that better here. So it very much, we and when a Taylor comes in needing a neck reset, which honestly is not terribly often, but it does happen. It's something where we're not having to charge $600. A neck reset on an old Martin or something like that is one of the more expensive repairs that we do, and one of the more labor-intensive repairs that we do. On a Taylor, it's one of the least expensive and one of the least invasive things that we do. So that's just really good engineering is how I kind of look at it.
Me and the heat gun are buddies.
Oh no!
But I'm gonna start heating this off. I don't know if it's gonna be too loud for you.
No, it's pretty good. Not a very loud heat gun, so I'll go ahead and put him up here. So yeah, do definitely be mindful of the conditions that your guitar is kept in, because and one of the things, unfortunately, that got cut off in our in our muted situation earlier, was basically that if you're traveling with your instrument, especially, that is one of the times that we see the most number of problems occur. If you don't want to be outside stuck in your car without any AC, your guitar doesn't either. Your guitar likes to live in roughly the same conditions that you do. So I know it can be really difficult sometimes, especially when you're traveling and your car is just full of stuff. But try to plan ahead to either have extra insulation around even your cases, so that any exterior heat would have a lot harder of a time getting down into the core, which is the instrument itself. Or if you, and the best case scenario, the best possible solution is wherever you go, take your guitar with you. You leave it in its case, but that's ideally what you want to do. If you're going to be spending the night at a hotel or anything like that, then you definitely want to take it in with you. Don't leave it in the car. So yeah, thank you, David, so much for your input there. If you have any questions or thoughts about guitars or guitar repair, by all means, please drop a line here for us. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I guess, just kind of the economics of doing guitar repairs, because one of the things that that we get asked a lot is is it worth doing this to my guitar? Sometimes, a lot of times, instruments come in that are not necessarily worth a whole lot of money, and the repair that it needs is several $100s. It may be just as much money to repair the instrument as to buy a whole new one. All right, well, thank you so much for stopping by, David. Yeah, by all means, this will be available up on our YouTube channels, as well as both of our Facebook channels as well, for both Gabriel's Guitars Spokane and Gabriel's Guitars Tucson. So we look forward to seeing you around. Thank you so much. But yeah, so there's a lot of things we have to have a conversation with customers a lot about, you know, how to kind of come to a sensible conclusion on their guitar, whether or not it's worth it to do a repair. And it's not always something that we can very easily answer for somebody. Usually, we can't make that decision for you. You know, it's a very personal decision. You know, if a guitar doesn't have a whole lot of you know, emotional attachment for you, it can be much easier to say, well, you know, I'll just buy a new one. But even at that, I think a lot of people kind of forget that guitars are organic things made out of wood. They shrink, they expand, they have problems that are to be expected. And so I tell people, I use the analogy a lot that guitars are kind of like cars, and in the same sense that, you know, you need to get your oil changed periodically. Oh no, your timing belt's out. If you want to keep driving this car, you're going to need to occasionally invest in it. That's just, you know, part of the deal on instruments. So, you know, yes, the you know, if you only spent $200 on a car, and you know, your timing belt goes out, and it's, well, okay, it's a $500 repair or something. That's probably way off on my pricing, but Mike would know better on the car stuff.
Several thousand, but yeah.
Yeah, you know, is it worth doing anymore? Probably not. You know, but depends. You know, was that your father's car? You know, did he leave it to you in his will? You know, these are all valid questions to ask about whether or not a repair is worth doing. But also, yeah, sometimes, you know, your car is a $200 car, but it needs an oil change, and an oil change is, you know, roughly $100 nowadays. You know, if you're not doing it yourself, you know, are you gonna change your car every 2 oil changes? Probably not. You know, so you know, it's worth having the oil changed on it, because it's not worth the effort of trying to find a new car, especially if you know that this car is perfectly fine. It works okay. You know, it gets you from point A to point B just fine. It's worth investing in. So we look at guitars oftentimes in the same way. You know, you can buy the exact same model of guitar from a manufacturer, same year, same model, and one is going to be vastly different sounding than the other. And yeah, you can buy another guitar that's the exact same thing rather than investing in the one you've already got. But if you know the one you've got is got a really good sound, it feels really good to you, then maybe it's worth keeping. Maybe it's worth investing in it that way. Because, you know, otherwise you may be taking sort of a gamble on trying to find something else for less, or trying to find the same guitar again. So, you know, just something to keep in mind, something to think about is if you are in need of guitar repair. You know, we try to hold ourselves to a high standard of ethics here, and we're not just out for your money. We happily advise people all the time that it's probably not economically worth you actually investing the money in this. And sometimes, you know, to our surprise, sometimes customers come back to us and say, I get that, but I want you to do it anyway. That happens all the time. So, but this brings us sort of, you know, perfectly into a really big kind of more concept question, and I think Mike and I are in perfect agreement on this, but is it worth setting up a cheap guitar? You want first stab at that one, Mike?
Yes, because, you know, cheap or not, if it doesn't matter how expensive the guitar is or cheap the guitar is. If it doesn't play right, you're not gonna want to play it.
That's yeah, 100%. I, you know, in the analogy that I was just using here about a an oil change on a car.
Yeah.
A setup is exactly that to a guitar as an oil change is to a car. It's something that you should do regularly. We typically recommend that about twice a year, usually as the seasons change, is kind of where your guitar is going to start to move and wander on you and maybe be a little less comfortable to play, or maybe you start hearing some buzzing. These are things that are normal, and some guitars are more susceptible to that kind of movement than others. So, some guitars, need setups every 3 months. Some guitars are able to go years without needing a setup done. And people only have to get a setup when they're changing a gauge or string or something like that. Something along those lines, they're doing something else to the guitar that warrants having a setup done.
Yeah.
But more often than not, it is something that should be considered kind of regular maintenance on a guitar. And I think, when we're talking about cheap guitars, most of the time, or a lot of the time anyway, we're talking about students. We're talking about, or kids,
Yeah.
people who are, people have either given them or purchased a guitar for them that is medium to low quality, very inexpensive. And, it's because, well, I don't know if he's going to really, take to this, or I don't know if they're really going to be interested in this long term, and I don't want to, spend a whole bunch of money and then just be out that much. And I have a couple of things to say to that, I guess. But, specifically talking about, is it worth setting up that guitar? Yes, 100%. First of all, nothing is going to dissuade somebody from learning how to play the guitar faster than an instrument that hurts to play or is uncomfortable to play. And it is far more likely that a cheaply made instrument is not going to be set up well. It's also far more likely that those instruments are going to need more regular maintenance because they're made with cheap materials. And those cheap materials are going to move more. So either it's a lower quality wood that's more susceptible to movement, or a worse cut of wood that's more susceptible to movement, or they are being put together in inadequate ways, those kind of things. So all of those things may come together and kind of create a situation where that guitar is in constant need of work. A setup is the number one and best way that you can mitigate other work needing to be happening to your guitar. So many things that happen, especially in acoustics, where you have like bridges coming up off the guitar, you have humps developing in the fretboard. A lot of those kinds of things can be mitigated by regular maintenance. You can either catch them early and address them, or prevent them from ever happening in the first place just by keeping the guitar well maintained. And a setup is the number one thing, I feel, to establishing a good maintenance routine. So yes, you can buy a guitar for $125, and then you come to us, and it's going to cost just as much to have it set up as the guitar cost. And you would maybe need to do that periodically. Once or twice a year is going to be something that you will need to continue to invest into that instrument.
But even a high-end instrument, you can go buy a Les Paul from Guitar Center, and it's not going to play as good as you or I can make it play. So there's that too.
Right. Absolutely.
It's not like high-end instruments come playing like butter either. So.
Definitely not, and especially, actually, I would say new instruments, new high-end instruments.
New instruments.
New instruments in general, but even high-end instruments, I guess I should say, almost always need to be set up when they're first done. And I will tell you right now, if you're not to knock Guitar Center in any way, shape, or form, but if you think you're getting a sorry, a couple people outside the window there. If you are going to Guitar Center or one of these kind of more big boxy kind of stores, if you think that you're going to be purchasing a new guitar from them that has been well set up, then you have fallen victim to some wonderful marketing from them. chances are, if it has been touched at all out of the box, which is first of all pretty unlikely. If it has been touched at all, it's probably by somebody who doesn't really know very well what they're doing, and is not somebody who specializes in these types of things. And not to knock any of the people who are working for Guitar Center doing their repairs. A lot of them are very passionate, wonderful people. They just don't have a lot of experience.
And Guitar Center doesn't give them the training they need.
Guitar Center does not give them the training they need. These are not people who have gone through any sort of certification process or any sort of schooling like we have. They are essentially, a random salesman, usually a random salesman off the floor that was selected to fill a position. And then somebody comes in and gives them 2 or 3 days training on how to set up an instrument and do some basic electronics work. We all start somewhere, and I don't knock any of these people, usually kids, who are put in this position of now having to be responsible for customers' instruments and things like that. I don't envy them in a lot of ways, but I certainly would not expect them to do very high quality work either. So just keep that in mind. If you are purchasing an instrument, a new instrument, whether it's high cost or low cost, you probably should immediately factor in the need for a setup right out of the box. I recommend to people who come in here all the time, talking about they're looking for a new instrument or whatever. I recommend to them that they keep in mind as part of their budget, that whatever budget they have for the instrument, factor in the fact that you should probably go directly from that store to here. And that's not just fancy marketing on my part. That's not me just trying to, get in on that sale. It's legitimate advice that I stand behind, that I agree with.
Or buy an instrument from a place like us or a mom and pop store. I worked at a mom
much
and
more
pop
likely.
store. Could I do a shout out?
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to work for a mom and pop store, and they have one location now in Redding, California, called Harriet's Music. Great, the owner's a great guy. He takes care of his customers. You buy a guitar from them, you get a year free of adjustments.
That's a fantastic deal.
I mean, if you don't like the way it plays, they set it up for you. It's still too low or too high. You come back, they'll dial it in just right. And that's the difference between buying from someone like us or Harriet's or any mom and pop versus the big box place.
You're way more likely to get a very much personalized, people who care more. They also are more likely to hire people with better training. That's how you wound up working there. Exactly. I mean, they're more willing to pay fairer rates. They're less corporate in nature. They care more.
Yeah.
So 100%. If you can purchase from a small local business, do it. It's a dying breed, and it's unfortunate that a lot of these stores are going out of business because they can't compete with the Guitar Center, mentality or the Guitar Center model.
Yeah, and I mean, he sold American Strats, and he had the high end stuff. He had 900 series Taylors and stuff. So don't think that if you go to a mom and pop, you're not going to get high end stuff.
Sure. Or a good assortment of things.
Yeah, of course.
I would consider us a local business here. We try all of the stuff that we carry in store for sale is used or consignment instruments, those kind of things. But we're very picky about what we take in, and we're not going to sell anything that's not ready for your hands. So, keep in mind that, some place like us is just going to go that extra mile to make sure that you're getting a good quality instrument. Guitar Center doesn't care, and to be frank, they don't pay their employees well enough to care. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, it's nothing against the people that are working there. They're doing what they think they can to make a living. But Guitar Center is so corporate in nature that it's they don't have the structure in place to pay people fairly, and
I don't think they care.
And that's the thing, is ultimately comes down to this kind of corporate nature that they do not actually care all that much about the people that are working for them.
The ground level.
The ground level people that are working for them. And so I wouldn't expect them to care about the instruments either. Like, why would they? Why would they put the extra time into trying to make a sale on something or getting a guitar set up really properly when it doesn't mean anything to them in the end? It doesn't mean that they're going to make any more sales. It doesn't mean that they're going to get a better paycheck or anything,
promotion or something.
So this is why, support local, people. Support local.
Yeah.
It's very, very important. And not only for us, of course. I would very much consider ourselves a local business, even though we do have a location, here in Spokane, Washington, and also one in Tucson, Arizona. We're a very small organization. Between the two stores, there's 5 people that work for me here. So it's a small thing, and it's when you buy a guitar from somewhere like us, obviously you're going to get a lot more from it, but also you're not feeding some CEO's paycheck. You're putting food in my kid's mouth, or securing Mike's rent over here, whatever. That's a much more noble thing to do, I think. So yeah.
So update on this.
Yeah, let's take a look at that.
So somebody had, maybe the owner or some other repair person had glued down the pick guard as it came out.
He actually mentioned when he brought it in that he had glued it, or he had somebody else glue it down at one point before, but it came back up again.
Right. So we'll have to scrape that off. But also, this is why, this is where experience comes in. So you may not be able to tell in the picture. You notice how this side of the guitar is darker than this side of the guitar?
Right.
Well, when the wood was milled, the grain ran out at an angle. So when they book matched the top, the grain ran out at an angle. So you're seeing in grain from this side and the opposite. Well,
the mirror image.
The mirror image. So that's why if you flip it around, all of a sudden,
look at that! It's suddenly it's darker on the other side again.
Yeah. So
yeah.
What you're seeing is that the reason that's important to this is because when I took the pick guard off, as you can see here, I wasn't paying as close attention as I should have at first, but it wanted to.
Let me actually get the close-up cam on this because I think that'll be a lot easier to see what you're talking about.
For one brief moment. So it wanted to peel up the wood though because it's ingrained. So, it's all about. I had to peel it from this side in order to avoid this any more damage here.
We call that feathering when the wood does that a little bit.
Because the grain's running out at this direction, so it's easy to peel the wood up because it's like the end of a straw or something. Wood fibers are like a bunch of straws glued together, and you can catch that like the end of it very easy, basically. And so it just.
This is totally normal and to be expected.
Yes.
It's not. It may look like it's not may not look great, but it is. First of all, it's easily dealt with, and also going to be hidden by a pick guard anyway. It's all going to wind up going under there. But you can see that this is the residual glue from that previous glue up attempt. So all of that's going to have to be removed. We want to get down to bare wood here, basically, so we're gluing directly to the wood, or in this case, we're going to add a little bit of a finish, a little bit of a, you said varnish? Or?
Yeah, I think that's the way to go on this one. Since we're not gluing the original pick guard back down, if we were gluing the original pick guard down, we would leave this bare because we're going to glue it, right to the wood. But I think since we're going to put one of these on, I think it makes sense to, put, and that's what I've seen other people do now. We don't have to. I think it makes sense.
It would probably be safe to do it otherwise.
Yeah.
This is the thing that we're kind of waiting on doing this repair because this is the cracking that occurred here that we did not initially see when the initial evaluation was done. And it's not a huge crack, but it is something that is probably worth addressing. We would need to humidify this guitar a little bit just to bring those cracks together. And then we can slip some glue in there, maybe a cleat. I don't know if there's enough room in there.
Yeah. Just right under.
We are directly
brace.
under some bracing right there, so it's a little little tough to.
And there is a sound hole cleat here already.
Can I? Ooh, look at that.
Let's get the light in there.
Yeah, let's see here.
Yeah.
See how cool we can do with this here.
There we go. Yeah, because there is a finger brace here, and then you got kind of this thing here going on. So you'll see. There you go.
Ooh.
So little. There you go. There you go.
There we are. Ooh.
So you can see, right. So the crack's right here. So other way. It's mirror image, so it's confusing.
Yeah, it is a little confusing.
I think you need to actually turn the opposite.
Well, that's the crack right there. It's kind of, you can see it, but we're also very, very close up. So
yeah, my finger's right here.
Oh.
Yeah. That's what I was trying to say. There it is.
Yeah.
It's right. Yeah, I guess it is right about. Yeah, there it is. There
you can see it. You can see just a little bit of that darker area there.
And shine it through, so you guys can see that. Good way to see it through. Oh no, you can't probably.
Won't be able to see it right now
with all the light in there. Yeah.
But if we do this, maybe we can see it now. There it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So there you can see exactly where that light comes through. That's where the crack is. So there is enough room there to put a cleat.
Yeah. Just on the other side of that
It would
bridge.
not be a bad choice, most likely.
Definitely. Anytime, especially, I think another thing Gabe and I pretty much agree on, especially something like this where it's in front of the bridge, the top doesn't move much here, especially at the I call it the crotch of the X brace, but where the X braces meet, the top, isn't, the top will move, but it doesn't really flex like it does here. So it's okay to put a little beefier, cleat than we might normally put.
Right.
And we want to help keep the
we don't want that
guard from pulling back out.
And we don't want that crack opening up again in the future. If we're going to repair this one, especially this, if that is going to be closed up, we want that to stay closed. And yeah, we're not, especially with all those braces right there, and so much added mass in that area.
Yeah.
Already, it really doesn't matter so much having a little bit of a higher mass piece of wood to put in there that makes it just really structurally sound.
But we're also only, we wouldn't even use a piece this big, but it's going to be a piece,
But also this thickness, maybe though, this is a fairly thick piece for making a cleat.
Might bring it down a little bit.
Yeah, maybe bring it down just a little bit, but something that's good and strong and beefy. Would really be a good choice, and it may even be able to get it right into those braces so that it just sits like perfectly up against those braces, give it a little added structure even. Would be a great choice. So we'll see what the customer says. If he decides that he'd like to do that, then we're happy to provide that service for him as well. So yeah, but I assume we haven't heard back from him yet.
No. And of course, if it was a crack somewhere else and it was smaller, something here in this area, we're going to use a much daintier cleat because we don't want to change the sound of the instrument.
Definitely not. When we're talking about cleats, one of the things that I'm very particular about crack repair and what I like to see coming out of my shops with regards to crack repair. I think crack repair and looking at crack repair is one of the best ways that you can really judge the ability of another luthier. And if somebody is an amateur the guitar repairman or luthier, it is very, very easy to see that in their cleating because it can be kind of difficult sometimes to really do it cleanly and get those cleats exactly where you want them and look good. And you think, well, what does it matter if it looks good? It's inside of the body, and I think a lot of people have that mentality, have that attitude. But then here I come. I'm a luthier, and I'm going to be sticking my mirror or my camera, right? I'm going to be taking my mirror and sticking that down in somebody's guitar, and I'm taking a look and saying, "Oh my God, what did somebody do in here?" That's that is something I never, ever, ever want another luthier to say about my work. I want somebody to look in there and go, nice. Nicely done.
Yeah.
That's the reaction that I hope to get with my cleaning jobs. And what that looks like is, nice, clean, perpendicular lines all the way down, where they have used a good quality piece of wood that's a quarter sawn piece of wood in a perpendicular grain direction to the crack. It is shaped. There's not glue squeeze out everywhere. And that's a difficult thing to do well. But when you do it well, it helps. First of all, I think it legitimately can do a better job of actually keeping the crack closed. That's one thing. Especially on valuable instruments, it can reduce the economic impact of having had repairs done to the instrument. And also I think it's just kind of the ethically right thing to do, is to spend the extra time and to really make, just because somebody isn't going to see it all the time doesn't mean that it shouldn't look good if somebody has to. I want somebody to be impressed with my work, even though it may be sort of a surprise, resting inside of a guitar.
So, the aforementioned issue here, I want to make sure I'm only scraping in this direction and not that direction so the wood doesn't catch and tear out.
Right, yeah. Tear out, feathering. We want to minimize that as much as we possibly can. You may have heard some horrible noises coming from over there. I assure you it is totally normal when you're scraping glue. It sounds terrible.
Yes.
You got to remember that guitars are essentially speakers. They are wooden speakers.
Yeah, it'll amplify.
And any sounds that you make with them get amplified and sound horrible. It's one of the reasons that we don't often allow customers into the back area as we're doing work. Obviously, there's insurance reasons for that, and all kind. We don't want people getting hurt. We have some very sharp, some dangerous tools and stuff too. But more often than not, is because we don't want people to kind of freak out about what we're doing. A lot of repairs, especially like bridge reglues and things like that, can look just absolutely traumatic and horrific if you don't know what you're looking at. And certainly the sound of them too is kind of like, ooh, oh God, all right. For someone like us, we've done them 1,000 times, and it's kind of like, it's not a big deal anymore. But I imagine, doctors, don't especially love having loved ones in the OR either. And it's probably for the same reason. They don't want people fainting on them and causing some other issue because they're freaking out because they don't know what they're looking at or don't know what they're hearing.
Or maybe even distracting them, and that might cause.
Or distracting them. Yeah, absolutely. That is definitely something else too. We don't,
Never want to hear a whoopsie.
Yeah, you never want to hear a whoopsie in either medicine or in guitar repair. Although, I will say, a lot of what Luthiery is and a lot of what guitar repair is learning how to fix your mess ups. When you're first starting out, especially, you are going to mess up. It's gonna happen. And I've had a number of apprentices over the years. Have you ever had an apprentice, Mike?
No.
No.
No apprentice.
We're gonna have to change that at some point.
Well, what's his name? Really wants to come over here.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
What's that guy's name?
Shout out to old what's his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a couple of people who've come to our shop here, wondering if we are hiring an apprentice or anything like that. I would love to. I just simply don't have the time right now. But neither does Mike either, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's why I've never done it.
At some point in time, perhaps. But I have a couple of times. I've had. Let me see here. I've had 4 different apprentices over the years. That's always like one of the very first things that I tell them is, as you start out, you are going to mess up. and it's okay. Anything is fixable, and that's something that we have to.
That reminded me of something I was thinking about last night. That's a good. Like I was telling a customer that came in, a fellow hobbyist, as he called himself. He builds and stuff, and he had some training. I was telling him, repair is harder than building because, if you mess something up on somebody's guitar, you can't just paint it black.
Right.
But if you mess up something on your guitar, you can paint it black, and they'll never know, and
it's true.
that song was written for luthiers. It wasn't really, that's who they were talking about.
Yeah, right.
But remember when we were in school, remember Chris Olsen was all like, yeah, if you screw up, well, I guess you're going to paint the back of your guitar black. And he's like, I wrote that song.
Yeah.
Remember?
Paint it black, yeah. Yeah, for sure. By the way, speaking of Chris Olsen real quick, I'm sure nobody watching knows who that is or cares, but he was one of our teachers at the Roberta Van School of Luthiery that we went to 17 years ago now. That's how Mike and I met, by the way, is at Luthiery School. We had a very interesting teacher, very, very skilled, very, very capable, and if you were on his good side, a really wonderful teacher. But man, it was not hard to get off of his good side, and then it was virtually impossible to get back on his good side. And he was not the best teacher to people who were not on his good side.
I never had a problem with him.
I didn't either, but I definitely saw him having problems with people.
Yeah, but they were doing really a-hole things, probably, right?
I would say he had a very low tolerance for dumb. Is really kind of what it came down to. I think, look, that's one thing if you're in a professional setting, but when you're a teacher,
yeah,
I feel like that can be a problem,
Yeah.
And I loved working with Chris Olsen. I think he was a fantastic teacher to me. And I liked his sense of humor and everything. Man, he was a character for sure.
Remember that one
I wonder what he's up to nowadays. His shop isn't around anymore in Phoenix.
One time remember he was talking about being careful with the super glue. He's like, you got to be really careful with that super glue because it'll super fuck up your finish.
Yeah.
True words.
Truer words have never been spoken.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway. So, I forgot what we were talking about before Chris Olsen came over.
Sorry. Weird. I don't know. You said something that made me think of the painted black thing. And I was literally laughing.
Fixing your mess ups is what I was kind of talking about.
I was laughing about that last night because of the painted black thing, and it's true because you could structurally fix anything on a guitar, but it won't necessarily be pretty. So
you can make it pretty again too. It's just it's a matter of
when you paint it black. just
yeah, I mean,
I'm messing around.
Yeah, no, I mean the thing is like
you could replace the wood completely.
Yeah, I firmly believe that literally anything on a guitar can be fixed and also made to look perfect again.
I think pretty, but maybe not perfect. I don't know.
It all depends. I mean, you may be in the market of hand carving a whole new neck.
Okay, well, yeah. I mean,
but like
without replacing like wood.
But this is what I'm saying though. Like, if it came down to it,
yes, 100%. We can fix anything.
You can fix anything.
Yes.
It's just a matter of how much time, how much energy, and how much money, or you're willing to sink into something. But when you're learning, when you're a student to these things, you're inevitably going to make mistakes, and some of them are going to be big mistakes, and you are suddenly going to have to do a repair that you would never, ever, advise a customer to pay for.
Right, yeah.
Those are kind of things that happen when you're learning,
Yes, yes, they do.
And it's absolutely invaluable experience points that you get The XP points.
We've all had those,
Where you now are personally sunk into something for way more than
Yes.
you are getting out of it.
Yes.
But what you are getting out of it is experience and knowledge, and it's a humongous opportunity.
Some of my highest praise has come from whoopsies that I had to fix.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that one guitar that I had to fix the entire top and just without getting into details, the guy was ecstatic when he got it back. I mean, I was judging my.
We're
work,
always
so.
our own harshest critics. I think that's kind of the artist side of what we do.
But I guess everybody was just like, "Oh, it's so awesome," because it was different. It was unique because of all the work I had to do, finish wise.
I have to say, that is generally true. I mean, on my largest mess ups, I don't think I've ever had a customer that was truly upset about it in the long run. Because I think most people, especially if you're transparent about what you're doing or what goes wrong, when things do go wrong. Most people are fairly understanding that things can happen. It's just a matter of, being transparent about it. I guess is really kind of what it comes down to. I mean, you think about it. People make mistakes, but and we're human like anybody else. I think now that we've been doing it for a long, long time, mistakes are fewer and further between. Certainly,
sure,
but they happen, and it's just very much more important that we are upfront and honest with customers when something like that happens, and say, here's what we plan to do about it. Here are our options, bring the customer into the decision making process on some of those things too is also important. Because oftentimes what winds up happening with those kind of things is not even necessarily that something is not repairable or isn't going to look good in the end, but what just happened is the timeline for the repair just got way longer.
Yes.
That's and some people are understandably bummed out when something like that happens. Totally get that. But more often than not, if you're explaining why suddenly a timeline needs to be so much longer, they're pretty understanding. I mean, it happens very infrequently, I would say, nowadays. Haven't had something like that happen in quite a while. That's the advantage of having a long tenure and doing something like this. So, yeah, but yes, you can wind up inevitably doing a lot of your learning on the job. I've had a few apprentices where they mess something up and they're afraid to tell me about it. They think I'm going to freak out. They think I'm going to be very upset with them. And it has happened more than once where they're very surprised that I'm not upset at all by it, I very much view it as well, here's your opportunity. Here's how we're going to learn it. Now's our opportunity to learn how we fix this. And inevitably those situations come in very handy later on, because you may not have to do that entire repair all over again, but some aspect of that repair, some small element of what you wind up having to do in the process becomes extremely relevant in some other completely normal repair later on. Or it may allow you to look at a repair in a different way or in a different light in the future that gives you a new idea. I mean, there's all kinds of repairs that we do that, there's 15 different ways to get it done, And one instrument may warrant having it done this way, and another instrument may warrant having it done that way. And having a broader toolbox of methods is a good thing, is a really good thing, because it allows us to kind of customize the repair to the instrument.
Yeah, I mean, look at taking a nut off. It's supposed to just pop right off with a little tap of the hammer.
Unless it's a Gibson.
Or sometimes, usually not at the factory, but somebody gets a little heavy-handed with the glue on a fender. And guess what? You're cutting the nut out because it ain't coming out.
There's just no other way of dealing with it,
but you're going to avoid serious fingerboard damage. It'd be easier to replace the nut than replace the wood on the fingerboard.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
it's you got to weigh your I guess
Lesser
your
of
time.
two evils.
Yeah, the lesser
kind of
of
thing,
two
you
evils.
know?
Yeah, and so you end up doing that with the Gibson too, and cut the nut out. I mean, you do all the things to try to avoid that, but sometimes it's just got, a whole freaking, tube of super glue in it for some reason.
Can we talk about the fact that CA glue is way more utilized in this profession than
Yes.
people realize?
Yes, but we don't use the crap you buy at Walmart.
No, we certainly don't. We use much higher quality CA glues and different viscosities of CA glue that you probably didn't even know existed out there. People, I think, mostly know about just kind of a normal CA glue, and maybe they know about gel.
Yeah.
We also use ultra thin CA glue for wicking into cracks and things like that in some situations. And I don't know. I think maybe there's a bit of a stigma about using CA glue. By the way, CA glue is a more proper name, I guess, for super glue. Cyanoacrylate glue, yes.
Yeah.
Is basically the real name of super glue, and it's very, very useful in our industry. It's for anything from placing nuts onto an instrument. You use a tiny little drop of CA glue on the front face.
Less is more.
Less is more on that one, because you don't need it doesn't really need much glue to stay in place once you have the strings on, but it needs just enough glue on there to stay in place so that it's not moving all over the place while you're trying to get the strings on.
Well, and you definitely, like you said, on the front face. You don't want it on the bottom because it'll tear it out.
It'll
because
tear out
the
the
nature
wood,
of the structure of wood.
Right. So just a tiny little drop of that is more than enough for almost any nut seating issue. There seems to be a lot of debate online about the best way to seat a nut, whether or not you even want to have glue on there or not. Some people really highly recommend it, like a small dot of Titebond. I personally don't think that's a great choice, but
Doesn't stick to it.
It'll work. I don't know. I think the CA glue is the proper way to go on it. But yeah, there's a lot of debate online just about
If you want to get down to theory and you probably can't measure this. You probably can measure it but not hear it. The CA glue is gonna give you a harder bond and transfer tone better. I know it should have a perfectly airtight, slot.
Yeah, in a perfect world, if you've manufactured a bone nut perfectly,
but it doesn't. And the nut slot's usually not perfectly square.
It's usually not, and then we're talking about plastic. Like Titebond does not bond to plastic at all.
And Titebond doesn't really crystallize like CA glue does.
Yeah, so I think I would say if you're using bone, Titebond would do okay, but it's still not really bonding. It's really not going to bond to the bone all that well either. I think, I don't know, I feel like CA glue is going to bond to both surfaces a lot better. But CA glue does bond to plastic, it does bond to bone, it does bond to wood. But Titebond hide glue, I think using hide glue on something like that would be just sort of wasteful, personally.
It would bond better than the Titebond as far as I understand, but I mean,
it just seems like why would you go through the effort of heating up your hide glue?
Yeah.
Just for a tiny little speck of glue to go on a nut, unless you already had it going for some other reason, I guess. But
some shops keep the pot going all day, every day.
Yeah.
Which I get that, but
I feel like it's probably kind of wasteful at a certain point. But we're talking wasting a couple of cents here and there.
That's not what I'm doing over here, by the way. Is my hide glue is a little too thin, so I had to add more hide glue to it. This is not how the manufacturer tells you to use it, but you most definitely can.
He's stirring the pot over there.
This little got a little too thin. It's like water now, so I'm having to add just a little bit more.
A little bit of the granules.
And I'm just mixing it and checking the viscosity, making sure it's got some thickness there. But I'm
That's
trying to keep it a little thinner because it's going to be for a crack repair.
Sort of some of the experiential knowledge of working with hide glue is kind of understanding and knowing what viscosity you prefer to work with.
Right, because if you make it too thick, it's not very useful. But and of course, you don't want to thin it out too much because then you're just putting water in the crack. It should be sticky still.
Right.
And kind of, it's it's basically Jello.
Yeah, it is. It's made out of. It's called hide glue because it's made from animals. That's the old horse glue factory there.
Yeah, and
that's what it is.
Who knows what they actually use these days? I would assume it probably comes from all livestock, being slaughtered.
Yeah, I would imagine it's probably a byproduct of the beef industry or something.
Probably the beef industry. Yeah.
In all honesty, I mean, it almost certainly has something to do with that. We use animal products. I think honestly, like if you look at the history of instrument making, animal products are synonymous with that. I mean, you had gut strings, back
strings.
cat gut strings.
Well, they weren't
and
actually
sheep
cat;
gut.
they were sheep gut.
Yeah,
and it's the intestines basically that's been stretched.
I was actually just watching a video the other night about a string quartet. So we're orchestral instruments here that is trying to keep things as close as possible to Baroque times.
Okay.
And so they actually use real catgut strings on all of their instruments, and it's interesting. First of all, they're they look like some sort of rubber compound or something like that.
Right.
They're also as opposed to steel strings, which is what you would see now. But they're also like brown in color. I mean, they're very clearly not some artificial product or anything. And on a upright bass, the low E string, one of the things they were talking about is how many sheep died for that one string. And
well, they didn't kill them just for the strings.
No,
though,
they didn't.
But yeah.
But the manufacturer today, who made these things, said it took about 30 sheep to make that one string. And there's a historical reference that they were discussing as well, talking about how a maker actually in the Baroque times said that it took an entire hillside of sheep to make a low E string.
Okay.
So animal byproducts, and we still today we use hide glue, we use bone, cow bone. It's bleached cow bone typically.
Yep.
Although there are other materials used for that as well. Ivory is something that used to be used. Obviously, it's illegal now, but a lot of pre-war Martins have an ivory saddle, and that's totally correct for the time period. There's all kinds of things that I had a guy once ask me to build him a nut and saddle out of mammoth tusk, which again, sure, I guess, we can do that. But it's, animal byproduct is something that is inevitable in this industry. It's I still think that bone is the best material for making a nut and saddle out of. I do really like, like Graphtec, for example. I think they do make a really, really nice product. It's sort of synthetic bone is kind of what they were going for.
It's supposed to have a more even tonal response, but it doesn't have a better wear.
No.
Bone wears a lot slower, and so
right.
And the importance of that on a nut is you can make that guitar play really good there and not have to worry about in a year replacing it.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. I think Graphtec or Tusk, any of those, TUSQ.
Yeah.
Those products are going to be a more homogeneous product. They are synthetic, so like every millimeter of that product looks identical to the millimeter next to it. Yeah. Bone is organic; it's not that way. It looks different, and has different density on one side to another, has different color properties. One of the things I actually have, in some instruments where it warrants it, I've moved away from using bleached bone product and just going to a natural bone, because I think it looks very pretty. It's not homogeneous in color from one side to the other. It has sort of its own grain pattern that you can see. It can be kind of yellowish. It can be kind of amber kind of color almost in certain areas. And I think it looks kind of pretty, especially when you buff it out and make it, really polished up and everything. But, that is also indicative of different densities, different structures that are within it, different molecular structures. Maybe there's a bit more calcium in this part of the bone than there was in the other, or whatever. So, we're talking about very, very small differences in the overall sound quality. Very, very small differences. But
Reuter was saying that bleach bone.
John Reuter, he's talking.
Yeah, bleach bone can have soft spots too. So that is
that's another thing to keep in mind too. If you add a chemical compound to bone like bleach, I believe I'm not actually 100% sure what they use to bleach bone. It's not like
it's not bleach.
It's not bleach. It's just bleaching is the process by which it's made white. But yeah, some sort of chemical. But yeah, it's going to inevitably, if it's taking out whatever color is in the bone, it's also taking out other things. Which may cause a lack of hardness in one area or something like that, or may remove a structural element of it. I have definitely seen in bleach bone, I have seen kind of like fractures and things that I couldn't say with any certainty as to whether or not it was like more likely in bleach bone versus unbleached bone or something like that, as to whether or not they're typically more fragile or something like that, but it's entirely possible. I would say anecdotally, maybe I could say that has been my experience. But regardless, animal byproducts and things like that are sort of unavoidable in this industry. But I view it in the same, especially when we're talking about an acoustic instrument. But really, all guitars that are made out of wood is also organic. It is also something that moves and shifts over time. In their own way, musical instruments are kind of like these living things, and I kind of like the idea, and I'll say outright that there's not necessarily any scientific basis whatsoever to me saying that bone is the best product out there. That's a completely subjective statement. But for me, I like bone the best, and it's a lot of that has to do with the fact that each bone nut that I make is going to be unique, and is going to be set for that instrument, and it'll have its own unique structures, just as the instrument itself has its own unique grain patterns and unique tonal qualities and things like that. So that's why I like to use bone as opposed to tusk or anything like that, personally. But that's not to say that somebody else's opinion on that isn't just as valid. So
yeah. I mean, and that's why they make guitars with different materials and all that stuff is personal preference. I mean, some things to most people's ears sound bad, but it's all subjective. I mean, I think there's some things people agree on for sure. And they've kind of figured out what sounds bad for sure. So that's why you can find cheap guitars that sound good, because we've kind of ruled out what sounds bad, and we stay away from that as builders, so.
Yeah, definitely. Do you also prefer bone, generally speaking, for both nuts and saddles?
I like I said, the sound of tusk is fine. It doesn't have the wear resistance that bone does, and I really don't like brass. I feel like brass is a little too bright. It's also it's harder on your tools too. And some of that tusk can be a little weird on your tools too. I don't know why. I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah, brass is not a particularly hard metal, and we don't need like specialized tools or anything like that to work on brass, but it is something that it does kind of add a brightness or a tinniness or whatever have you to the sound of the instrument. I think it's valid in some places.
Sure, whatever the customer wants, really. But
yeah, definitely. One of my favorite basses that I own is it's a Spectre Euro 5 LX. That is an instrument that comes with a brass nut.
Right.
And I really like it. And the reason is because I like that it adds a brightness to the instrument. A bass is a very low instrument, and it's. But just my playing style, I like some of these kind of like Geddy Lee tones where you get a little more growl, a little more bite from the string. You got it's not these big Motown fat sounds and stuff like that. You're kind of almost set up more for kind of a soloing kind of thing on a bass. I think a brass nut is an excellent choice if that's your playing style.
That's true.
So those are considerations on material as well, and certainly if you have a tremolo, like if you're using a tremolo where you're going to be and you're playing that all the time, tuning stability is something that you should probably be considering your nut material on. Using Graphtec would be a good choice on something like that. You will have to replace it more often, but it will glide a little bit easier than probably even bone would. Although, of course, we can lubricate a nut to assist with that too.
Right.
But yeah, a Graphtec nut or even a graphite nut would be an excellent choice for that. So yeah, I think the nut material or saddle material, I think pretty much always, when we're talking about an acoustic guitar, for me, I feel like bone is always the best choice on that.
Back to wear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because that you see that, and that matters because that's going to change your your action and all that stuff. But yeah, I mean,
I'm not a fan of plastic saddles.
No, plastic saddle or nut is just that's like that's going to inhibit your tone.
I would actually, in fact, I would say on an acoustic instrument, bone is always the best option. I feel like
it does seem to I mean, even going from like a tusk to bone, it does. Bone is obviously, like we said, a little brighter, I feel like, but it's you get so much more projection and so much more tone transfer from bone, I feel like, and
yeah.
But if I had to choose a material other than bone, I guess it would be tusk. If because brass, I don't know. I've never heard a brass saddle. I can't say. And you'd have to.
Actually, I was just thinking. Yeah, no, I actually have once.
But you'd have to A/B them to really, on that guitar to see how it changed that specific guitar.
Yeah, only one time have I ever come across a brass saddle on an acoustic, and it was goofy. I mean, it was kind of one of these older but mid-grade kind of instruments. Somebody had clearly just tinkered all over this thing, and it's kind of and it had an interesting sound. It was very bright and very tinny, but it worked for this guy. He was kind of playing kind of bluegrassy kind of stuff. And so having that kind of twangy sound was fine for him.
Yeah, sure.
And it worked out okay. But I would say for a vast majority of instruments, that just doesn't make any sense. But on an electric guitar, especially, I think the choice of nut material is a bit more nuanced.
Yeah, it doesn't affect the sound as much, and then you're really much more about tone transfer, I guess. But
tone transfer and tuning stability.
Yeah, tuning stability. Yeah. And which, I mean, if you're having tuning issues, that is usually the problem, is that it's binding in the nuts.
We were actually just talking about this yesterday. Is that when you're having tuning issues, if you have a guitar that just does not stay in tune, everybody immediately goes to the tuners, to the tuning machines, and they're like, they come in all the time with like, I need some new tuning machines. Like, okay, hold up, what's going on? What's the problem? Because more often than not, tuning issues has nothing to do with a tuning machine, and even at that, tuning machines are often repairable. So
the tuning machine's gonna fail gritty when you turn it. It's gonna be hard to turn. It might
or slip.
It might like click. You're
Click,
gonna feel You're gonna feel that gear slip. It'll get tight and then pop. And then the post is going to move erratically. So you can see that kind of stuff happen. It's
right. That's how you know a tuning machine is failing. There'll be some sort of mechanical problem with it.
Yeah, you're gonna feel it.
You're gonna feel it, and even at that, they oftentimes still can be repaired. But it's usually not the cause of tuning issues. Tuning issues are almost always either the nut or the saddle,
yep.
Or bridge area, where there's some sort of binding occurring between the string and some other either metal or the string, wherever the string is going either over and across or through. That is where you're more likely to see some sort of tuning issue occurring.
Yeah, like on a Bigsby, it could be at the saddle, but like on a Fender saddle, it's probably not going to be at the saddle because it doesn't really move there.
Right, exactly.
So.
Yeah, or the other thing it could be is an intonation issue. We have to, whenever we're talking to a customer that's complaining about tuning issues, we have to get kind of specific and ask them, exactly what's going on, because the symptoms can be very informative as to what the problem might be.
And some rare...
Hey, Matt, thank you so much for following us. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. In the rare occasion, sometimes you get a string.
And Matt Deach. That's my brother-in-law right there. Yeah, so...
It's happened once. My recorded,
Oh, I didn't even realize that we had this this little alert box thing going.
Okay, what's that do?
It lets us know when
somebody comes in.
When somebody comes in.
Oh, nice. Oh.
Well, it's so these are not actually people that are watching right now, but these are things that happened within the last day or so, I guess. Okay. So I'm actually going to turn that off because it's not really relevant to what we're doing right now. But anyway.
So I had a guy come in one time. He put brand new strings on his guitar, and it was the ha-ha G string.
Yeah.
It's not tuning right. And I've only seen this happen once, and so when he was playing like octave chords, it was out of tune. The guitar was in tune,
right?
More or less, but basically it was like an intonation issue. And I, checked the saddle, checked this, because it was doing this weird thing, and we just came down to like, well, I'm not sure. Let's try changing the string. So we had singles, so I pulled out, the right size, put it on there, went away.
Yep.
But super rare.
Yeah, the strings themselves, that's actually usually a very good place to start. So, go ahead.
You got it.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Gabriel's Guitars. This is Mike.
So, yeah. Do have a couple people watching. If you guys have any, questions or topics that you'd like to discuss as well, by all means, send us a message or write a comment, something like that. Happy to discuss anything, any input you might have. We talk about all sorts of different topics, obviously about guitar repair, and about guitars themselves, different kind of ideas of guitar building as well as repairing. So, by all means, if you have any anything that you'd like to talk about or any issues that you're having on your instruments, we are here to help with that. One of the We'll get Mike's opinion on this too, but I wanted to talk about this other kind of debate, I guess, that's going on in the Luthiery world right now, which is about the term luthier, and whether or not, I guess, first of all, whether or not we consider ourselves luthiers, what that term really means, or compared to the term guitar tech, and what if any differences are there between the two things, and what do we consider ourselves and why. So I will say that I personally do consider myself a luthier. I have an actual certification from a certified education system that has certified me as a luthier. So I do consider myself a certified luthier because I am one. That is like literally my title. But what that means, I think very literally, luthier comes from a very old French word, luthier. You may recognize, the name of an instrument, a lute. It's a very old Renaissance instrument, and a luthier is somebody who made lutes. That was kind of the fretted stringed instrument of the time, one of the first. And so somebody who made lutes is what eventually became luthier in English. So what that became and what that literally means is a maker of stringed instruments. So yes, I do consider myself a luthier because I do and have made stringed instruments. But do I, as a repair facility, necessarily call myself a luthier in those terms? Am I acting as a luthier when I'm sitting at the bench working on a guitar? Not really. I'm more working as a guitar tech. So guitar tech can have kind of two different and distinct meanings. And it kind of comes down to the practical nature of it. So a guitar tech, I think, it can be, first of all, the title of a person who is touring with a musician. And they are the person who is in charge of maintaining the artist's instruments, getting them tuned up, performing setups, changing strings, basic, small repairs, small electronics repairs, perhaps small upgrades, maybe possibly switching out a pickup or two, and that's about it. They don't do much more than that in regards to repair of instruments, but they may not even have the capability. They may not have the education or knowledge of how to do that. But they certainly do not have knowledge of how to do more complicated repairs. If we're talking about acoustics, doing any sort of woodworking is probably outside of their comfort zone significantly. Doing any sort of, bridge reglues or neck resets or crack repairs, any of those kind of things are going to be outside of the realm of a guitar repairman or out of a guitar tech when we're talking about live music. They typically also have other responsibilities, which include getting information about the show and working with the show as it's occurring. They have to know what songs are coming up, what instruments are needed for those songs, getting this guitar in that tuning for this song that's coming up, and then the song after that is this one. So it's a very involved and high pressure job, but doesn't necessarily require the same technical trade skills as a luthier would have. But a guitar tech can also be somebody who works on instruments and who can do all of these things, but doesn't necessarily have a certification, or does not actively build instruments. So I think, a lot of it comes down to semantics, really, I think. But ultimately, I think that a luthier is somebody who, I think really the only qualification for somebody calling themselves a luthier is that they have built at least one instrument. I think that, to me, that's what I would consider a luthier, and that they do it professionally. Beyond that, I think there's kind of a big wide gray area. And a guitar tech is either, like I said, the person that is working in kind of a live show environment, or somebody who is expressly doing or explicitly doing repairs, but not doing any sort of building operations. And I would call myself a luthier because I have a certification in that, and that is what I do. I have built many instruments over the years, and that is part of what I am and what I do, and I feel like it's kind of the widest umbrella over the whole thing. So I was, it's a bit of a debate online right now, in the world as to first of all, what is a luthier, and do you consider yourself a luthier, or do you consider yourself a guitar repairman or a guitar tech?
Right.
And what I was just kind of explaining, to me anyway, the term guitar tech can mean one of kind of two things.
Right.
Either somebody who works on guitar repair but does not build at all.
Right.
Or in the context of live shows, that's the literal name for the position of the person who kind of takes care of the instruments and prepares the instruments for certain songs and is sort of like part of the show in that way as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so they have to have a very particular knowledge base, but it may not be very involved in the repair end of things. They're just going to have sort of a basic knowledge of very basic repairs.
Well, and they may have to do things that we would never do because of, I got to play a show tomorrow or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, it is, I think, a useful skill. We've had people come to us many times where it's like, I got a show tonight. Can you fix this? That is very much like the role of a guitar tech in a touring place. Is like, oh my God, I need this guitar to work in 10 minutes. How do I make it happen?
Right. Yeah.
And for us, we have to know how to kind of do the quick and dirty fixes too. But for them, that's like their life. That's their bread and butter.
Well, here's a good example where it's like we're typically gonna fix a headstock break. Oops.
Move us over there.
With wood glue, but I suppose if necessary, you could use super glue if you need it. If it's like if a guy comes in right now and he tells me he needs his headstock glued on, and just make it work so I can play tonight. That's the only option you have.
So, kind of an interesting story. So one of the guys that works for us in Tucson, very talented luthier, Chuck Worthy is his name. He was a guitar tech for touring bands for a long time, long before he actually even became like a certified luthier later on. He kind of started out his career in that live setting because he was a member of another band that was also touring, and he kind of had a natural inclination for working on guitars, and so he kind of wound up being assigned this position by the other bands. Because he was good at it, and he was, very meticulous about, knowing what songs and, of all of the groups, and he was in that world already. And he, told me a story about a time where, there was a ukulele, like a very, nice handmade ukulele that somebody needed for one of these songs, and in the rehearsal, the guy was strumming it, and the neck came off. And for a touring musician, this is the only ukulele they have.
Right.
Their options now are find another ukulele somewhere, or jerry rig this thing back together for the show tonight.
Right. Yep.
And they were somewhere remote. They were in Fairbanks, Alaska, or something like that. Where are you gonna find a ukulele right now?
Probably could find glue, but not a ukulele.
Yeah, and glue is not a great option right now then either, because if you've got a show in an hour, that glue is not going to be set and dry by that point in time.
CA glue.
CA glue, but is that going to hold a neck? I don't know. On a ukulele, maybe,
But also, it takes 2 hours technically for it to cure to get reached.
Right. So but this is the thing. It's what do you do? Okay, now you're flying by the seat of your pants, and ultimately what they wound up doing was using some rope to basically tie the neck back to the bottom of the base of the body to hold it in place against the string tension, and apparently it worked well enough to get through the show. And then they were able to
headstocks back.
Yeah, we've used it as a method of a glue clamp.
Yeah. Yep.
same kind of thing. We've used a similar method in a different way. I would certainly never want to have to go on stage like that.
No.
But when you have no other choice, and you know, that's what you do, you know? So, like, those kinds of, like, you know, seat of your pants, like, fast thinking kind of things. That's another role of the guitar tech, too, is, like, making sure that you have all the instruments, you know, lined up and ready that you need for the show. And that's kind of what I mean by, like, they're like, part of the production in that way.
Yeah.
He was also telling me about a situation where they were somewhere very, very remote, and they got off the plane, and none of their gear came off the plane. And they're supposed to be playing a show, and they have no equipment. Well, guess whose job it is to go, you know, find guitars and amps and stuff to make the show happen. That's the guitar tech's job. And ultimately they wound up putting stuff out onto social media and got their fans to bring in their own personal gear so that they could then, you know, play a show. So those are the kind of things that guitar techs do in relation to a live show. But a guitar tech within the repair world, I don't know. Would you agree with my definitions of those things?
Yeah, I think most people online kind of agree with that too. And you know, I mean, I think for whatever reason, I feel like people are really critical of when you call yourself a luthier, though.
I can sound a little pretentious.
Yeah,
you know, I think,
but I think generally, if people aren't being pretentious. Generally, it's like you said. If you build instruments, you're a luthier. If you repair stuff, you're a repair technician or a guitar tech or whatever. But I guess if you do both, then you're just a luthier. I don't know.
I feel like if you're doing both, you can kind of pick whichever you feel the most identified to. There are loads of luthiers. There are loads of luthiers that I know who just don't really like that term. They just don't like calling themselves that because I think maybe they feel pretentious saying it.
Well, and I think people take it that way.
Sure, yeah. I think to some degree, I feel like the fact that you and I both have gone to a school that we have an actual certification, you know, like from a, an educational board that oversees the school that we went to that, you know, hands out certifications in luthiery. I don't feel pretentious at all calling myself a luthier because, like, literally I have a diploma that says I'm a luthier, you know?
Well, I think it's how you act towards other people when you talk about it, you know, whether, obviously, hopefully you're not being pretentious to your customers because that's bad business, but other luthiers, you know, and that's kind of what I was telling the customer last night is that I don't really want to, you know, I will geek out about guitars all day with other luthiers, but as soon as the pretentious one comes in the door, I'm really not interested. Yeah. You know, because I don't need to. It's not a pissing match. Yeah, it's not a pissing contest.
I don't know. There is quite a bit of that kind of air and mentality in this world, like
especially the old school.
Yeah, very much so with the old school thing. It's one of the elements of this world that I have very much tried to remove from my business entirely. Yeah. I hate that kind of pretentious, like, I know better than you, and I'm a better builder than you, or I'm a better repairman than you are kind of thing. It's totally unnecessary, this competitive BS.
Yeah.
And then, of course, that then does translate into the relationship with the customers. You know, the guy I apprenticed under, he's dead now, so I have no problem, you know, shit talking him. But his name was Richard Beck, and he was notorious in the Phoenix area as being a fantastic luthier who was also a giant a-hole. And that's true. I mean, that is exactly who he was. And I have said, not that I didn't learn other things from him, but the number one thing I learned from him was how to not run my business. Because, you know, he was the kind of person who, you know, if he had done a setup for somebody and the guy comes in, you know, after having picked up the setup or whatever, the guy comes back in saying, yeah, no, I'm getting a little buzzing or something on my fourth fret, you know, after you did the setup, I was hoping you could fix it or whatever. He would, you know, completely berate them and tell them that they're an idiot. You know, they're playing their guitar wrong, you know, and, you know, to get the hell out of the store and never come back. And was like, Jesus, dude, you know, like, it was awful even being associated with that. Even as somebody that was like learning, I felt really terrible for his customers in a lot of ways, and so but it does translate in within the Luthiery world as well with other techs and other repairmen and luthiers that that there's this kind of like pissing match, of like, oh, I'm better than you, oh, I can do this, that, and the other thing, oh, like, how many have you built this year? And that's kind of it's like, there's no need for any of that. Like, it's just totally unnecessary. So, those kind of things are very unimpressive to me as well.
And and because there's plenty of people that there's people out there building guitars that I'm sure are doing better work than me that haven't been doing it as long. They just
naturally inclined.
Naturally inclined, and I mean, and that's awesome, Why should we? Why should you be in competition with them? I mean, when it's like, I thought we do this because we love instruments and we love music. It's a part of the love of music is sharing it, not keeping it for yourself.
100%.
I
thoroughly agree with that. And Luthiery, as I see it, is also an art form.
Yeah.
Repair work is an art form. A lot of it is kind of duplicating the same things over and over again, but
right.
There is quite a lot of creativity and a lot of innovation that has to go into what we do. And to me, it would be like Picasso telling Rembrandt, like, "Oh, I got better painting skills than you." Not to call myself Rembrandt or Picasso, but it's the same. It's the same ludicrous kind of idea. Like there is room in this world for both of you.
Right.
There are certainly some things that are just wrong. I think there are some people who have no business doing guitar repair or Luthiery. But then again, also like I was saying, before about some of my apprentices and things like that. Everybody starts somewhere. There's a gentleman who builds some really, really nice instruments at our and we have had a few of them in our store in Tucson. And he came to us very early on in his building career. And the first couple of instruments that he brought to us to consign for him they looked very beautiful. They looked very, very pretty. But, like for me, as somebody who has built and who works on instruments all day long, the first couple, when you start looking at the fine details of what he was doing, kind of so-so on a lot of stuff. But as time went on, every instrument that he brought us got better and better and better. And and nowadays, I'm quite confident anything he's going to be bringing in to us that for consignment is going to be an exquisite instrument. And they're just going to keep getting better, honestly.
And that's what you can't replace experience. It's like, my first refret, terrible.
Absolutely.
Everybody's first refret is awful.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some people do okay.
I feel like that's the guy who shoots a hole in one his first time playing golf or something. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, like maybe that happened, but do it again.
Yeah, right, exactly. And things, when you do a refret, different things happen. Sometimes the fingerboard chips out. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it chunks out. Yep.
There was a gentleman who was commenting on one of our TikTok videos earlier today, in which I was discussing a refret, and that somebody had done a really nice job on, and he was saying that he did his own refret and it plays great, but it looks terrible.
Right.
And it was like, yep, been there. I know what that. I remember what that was like.
We've all been there.
Yep. But that's experience. That's
or you have
what
to
comes with it.
Level crown and polish half the freaking meat off,
right? Yeah.
To make it level.
At which point you might as well just start over anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Well, we are running out of time here. I really appreciate everybody who stopped by and who came in to see us and talk with us. It's been a really fun week talking about all kinds of different ideas and Luthiery kind of things. We do this every single Saturday at noon on noon Pacific time. So be sure to stop by next week. You can view this on our YouTube channel as well as our Facebook channels, both for Gabriel's Guitars Tucson and Gabriel's Guitars in Spokane. We are here to answer any questions that you have about guitars, about guitar repair, about luthiery, conceptually or otherwise. This is what we do every Saturday. So by all means, we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you so much. And go to www.gabrielsguitars.com for any other information you might need on our operation here. So thank you so much. Have a great day. Really appreciate you.